The lost Israelite tribe of Ephraim, Britain. When the nation of Israel was created, it originally consisted of 12 tribes, which were descended from the 12 patriarchs, the sons of Jacob, whose name was later turned into Israel. So the 12 tribes of Israel, they lived in Egypt and left Egypt during the Exodus and came to the land of Canaan. And in the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel were united under the kings Saul and David and Solomon. But then, during the latter part of King Solomon's reign, King Solomon sinned because of his numerous wives, pagan wives, and King Solomon also worshipped pagan gods. And because of this, the God of Israel decided that as a punishment, the 10 northern tribes of Israel, they would secede from the royal house of David and Solomon in Jerusalem. And that took place during King Solomon's son, King Rehoboam. So the 10 northern tribes of Israel seceded from the royal house of David and Solomon in Jerusalem and formed their own state in the north of Israel called the Kingdom of Israel. But it only consisted of 10 Israelite tribes. And then in the south there was the Kingdom of Judah, that was the rump state of the royal house of David and Solomon, and the Kingdom of Judah consisted only of the tribes of Judah and Benjamin. But the 10 northern tribes of Israel in the Kingdom of Israel, they continued to worship pagan gods. And therefore the God of Israel decided that he would let the Assyrian Empire invade and conquer and deport the 10 northern tribes of Israel. And that took place approximately 721 BC. So then the Assyrians, they deported the 10 tribes of Israel out of the land of Israel and settled them in areas in the northern parts of the Assyrian Empire. And in the following centuries, the Jews back in the land of Israel, they simply didn't know what had happened to these 10 tribes of Israel. And that's why the 10 tribes of Israel became known as the lost 10 tribes of Israel. But today, many Jews believe that the lost 10 tribes of Israel are somewhere out in the world, and that they one day will be reunited with the Jews, that is Judah. For example, the American rabbi Shmuley Boteach, whom Newsweek magazine called America's most famous rabbi, he wrote, quote, "An Israelite is someone who is a descendant of Jacob. After the dispersion of the 10 tribes, the Israelites were referred to as Jews because the remainder of the Jewish nation, those who today form the bulk of the Jewish people, all stem from the tribe of Judah." Unquote, from Shmuley Boteach's book, Judaism for Everyone, from 2002. But through secular history, Bible prophecy and other sources, many people have traced the descendants of the lost 10 tribes of Israel to Europe, where they today make up the bulk of the nations of northwestern Europe and their descendants around the world. Some of those people who have believed in this are, for example, the British King George VI, who ruled during World War II, and a lot of other people. For example, most or at least many of the founders of the Pentecostal movement in America and in Britain and in Denmark. And not only can the lost 10 tribes of Israel be traced to northern Europe, but there's also certain of the individual Israelite tribes that can be traced to certain peoples and nations in Europe. For example, the tribe of Dan can be traced to Denmark, where I am, and Ireland and Scotland. And the tribe of Zebulun can be traced to the Netherlands, and the tribe of Reuben can be traced to France. The tribe of Benjamin can be traced to Iceland, and the tribe of Manasseh can be traced to the United States. And then we have the tribe of Ephraim, which can be traced to Britain. So in this study, we're going to show some of the many connections that are between the Israelite tribe of Ephraim and Britain, the peoples of Britain, and also their daughter nations around the world, Canada and Australia and New Zealand and other English descended people around the world, such as the English-speaking South Africans. Joseph got the birthright. Of Jacob's 12 sons, it was Joseph who got the birthright, even though Joseph was the 11th son, that is the second youngest. The birthright blessing, it means that you receive a double portion of what the other brothers get. So under ordinary circumstances, it would have been Jacob's firstborn son, Reuben, who would have gotten the birthright. But because Reuben, he lay with Bilhah, slept with Bilhah, one of Jacob's concubines, then Jacob stripped Reuben of the birthright, and then he gave it to his favorite son, who was Joseph. We read about that in the book of 1 Chronicles. We quote, "Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but forasmuch as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel. And the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright. For Judah prevailed above his brethren, and of him came the chief ruler, but the birthright was Joseph's." Unquote from 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verses 1 to 2. That the birthright was given to Joseph is fulfilled in Britain and the British Empire, which was the greatest empire in the world from maybe sometime in the middle of the 19th century to around World War II. And it's also fulfilled in the United States of America, which has been the world's greatest empire since World War II and until today. Ephraim, the leader of the 10 northern tribes. Joseph had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. So again, under ordinary circumstances, the birthright would have gone to Manasseh, who was the older. But when Jacob was on his deathbed, he blessed Joseph's 2 sons and gave the greater blessing to the little brother Ephraim instead of the older brother Manasseh. Quote, "And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. And he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. Unquote from Genesis chapter 48, verses 13 to 14 and verses 17 to 21. This was fulfilled when Israel departed out of Egypt in the Exodus. In Israel's wanderings in the wilderness, Israel was divided into 4 camps, being the camp of Judah, the camp of Reuben, the camp of Ephraim, and the camp of Dan. The leading tribe in the camp of Ephraim was, of course, the tribe of Ephraim, and we read about that in the book of Numbers, chapter 2. So after Moses passed away, Joshua became the leader of Israel, and Joshua, he was of the tribe of Ephraim. So after the United Kingdom of Israel was divided into 2 kingdoms, which took place around 931 BC, the capital of the 10-tribed northern kingdom of Israel was in the territory of the tribe of Ephraim. And the man who led the revolt against the royal house of David and Solomon in Jerusalem, it was Jeroboam, who also was of the tribe of Ephraim. And the Ephraimite Jeroboam, he also became the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Ephraim, a multitude of nations. When Jacob blessed Ephraim and Manasseh, he foretold that that his seed shall become a multitude of nations. That was in Genesis chapter 48. And this prophecy was to some extent fulfilled in the northern kingdom of Israel, of the 10 tribes, because the Bible sometimes refers to it as Ephraim or the house of Ephraim. But in prophecy, it is fulfilled in its entirety in Britain, which in numerous ways is and has been a multitude of nations. For example, in 1603, In 1603, the Kingdom of England, which consisted of England and Wales, entered into a personal union with the Kingdom of Scotland under King James of Scotland. It was him who also gave his name to the King James Bible, which is the Bible we quote from in this study. And at the same time, King James, he was also King of Ireland. So therefore, since 1603, the King of Britain was King of 4 nations: England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. So then in 1707, the kingdoms of England, which included Wales, so the kingdoms of England, Wales and Scotland, they united into the Kingdom of Great Britain. So the King of Great Britain, he was at the same time also King of Ireland, and he was also Prince Elector of Hanover in Germany. So in 1714, the Prince Elector George of Hanover, he became the King of Great Britain. And by the way, along with him came the famous composer George Frederick Handel, whose German name is Georg Friedrich Händel, whose operetto The Messiah is probably the most famous Christian work of classical music. So therefore, since 1707 or 1714, the King of Britain was king of 5 nations: England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland and Hanover. But then in 1801, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and the Kingdom of Ireland were merged into the Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. It was in this merger that the present Union Jack flag was created. And the Union Jack, by the way, means the Union of Jacob, because Jack is short form for Jacob. So from 1801, the King of Britain was king of the 4 British nations, but he was also king over the emerging British colonies in Canada, India, and various places in Africa, Australia, and Central America. And of course, the 13 British colonies in North America, they had already seceded to form the United States, which primarily is of the tribe of Manasseh and not Ephraim. So through the 19th century, the British colonial empire expanded to embrace 1/4 of the world's population. And in 1926, the British colonies, which with the predominantly British populations, they were granted the status of dominions, and that meant that they were equals with Great Britain in the British Empire. And these were the dominions of Canada, Newfoundland, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa and Ireland. And then after World War II, the British Empire was gradually dismantled and replaced by the Commonwealth of Nations. And the head of the Commonwealth of Nations is the King of the United Kingdom, who today is King Charles III, even though many of the member states of the Commonwealth actually are republics. So today the United Kingdom is in itself a small multitude of nations, in that the UK consists of England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So this history of Britain as a multitude of nations rather than just one nation or one ethnic group, that's the fulfillment of Jacob's prophetic blessing to Ephraim, that he would become a multitude of nations. So to people who believe that the Jews are all 12 tribes of Israel, it makes no sense whatsoever that Ephraim was to become a multitude of nations, because are the Jews a multitude of nations? They are not. 2,520 years of punishment fulfilled in America and Britain. In Leviticus chapter 26 verses 12 to 28, God told Israel that if Israel persisted in worshipping other gods, the God of Israel would punish them 7 times. And after those 7 times had expired, Israel was loosed from the punishment from God. Now in biblical terminology, a time means 360 days or 360 years. And then if we multiply 360 years by 7 times, then we get 2,520 years. Then if we calculate the date of the conquest and deportation of the individual Israelite tribes, we should therefore arrive at the year when they were loosed from God's punishment. The tribe of Manasseh in Bashan was conquered by Assyria in 745 BC, and 2,520 years later we end up in AD 1776, which is the year that the United States of America was founded by the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th. The tribe of Ephraim was conquered and deported by Assyria in 721 BCE, and 2,520 years later we end up in AD 1801, which was the year that the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland was formed. So by calculating the 2,520 years of punishment on Israel, we can thereby confirm that Britain is Ephraim and that the USA is Manasseh, at least Manasseh in Bashan. The Union Jack and Jacob's blessing. The fact that Jacob crossed his arms when he blessed Manasseh and Ephraim is fulfilled in the flag of the United Kingdom, which is called the Union Jack, where you find a combination of two flags on top of each other. A flag of St. George from the flag of England and a diagonal St. Andrew's cross from the flag of Scotland. The diagonal St. Andrew's cross is peculiar among the flags of the world, and that's because it is a fulfillment of the prophecy which Jacob gave to Ephraim and Manasseh 3,200 years ago, where Jacob crossed his arms in a diagonal cross. So just like the flag of that's just like the flag of Scotland and the flag of the Union Jack. Jacob's blessing to Ephraim was greater than his blessing to Manasseh, but we also find the diagonal cross with which Jacob blessed Ephraim and Manasseh in the United States. The flag of the United States of America, the Star-Spangled Banner, does not contain a diagonal cross, but the flag of the Confederate States of America, they were the ones who tried to secede in the 1860s in the American Civil War, that does contain the same diagonal cross with which Jacob blessed Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, Jacob gave the greater blessing to Ephraim, and therefore the diagonal cross is still found in the flag of Ephraim, the Union Jack. And Jacob gave the lesser blessing to Manasseh, and therefore the diagonal cross is only found in a part of America which has ceased to exist. The Union Jack and Joseph's coat of many colors. Joseph was Jacob's favorite son, and therefore Jacob made Joseph a coat of many colors. Joseph's coat of many colors is reflected in the national flags of Joseph even to this day. The nations which serious Bible students identify with the lost 10 tribes of Israel have a variety of flags. Generally speaking, they can be divided into three groups. First of all, we have the cross flags of Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Finland and Switzerland. And then number two, we have the tricolor flags of France and Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium and Luxembourg and the Republic of Ireland. And then number three, we have the flags of many colors. And that's the English-speaking nations of the world, the United Kingdom and Canada and Australia and New Zealand and the United States. People who study the lost 10 tribes of Israel, they almost all identify Ephraim with the British nations of the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. And then they also identify the tribe of Manasseh with the United States of America. All these nations have flags which are more colorful than the other Western nations, which the same people also identify with the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And that's because the English-speaking nations, they are descended from the Israelite tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim, the sons of Joseph, who was given this coat of many colors by his father Jacob. Joseph did lose his coat of many colors, but his descendants still have it to this day. Ephraim and Bulls. The tribe of Ephraim had a special connection with bulls, and so does Britain. When Moses blessed the 12 tribes, he said of Joseph, which included the two tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, we quote, "His glory is like the firstling of his bullock," unquote, from Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 17. When the Ephraimite Jeroboam led the revolt of the 10 tribes against the royal house of David in Jerusalem, Jeroboam set up 2 golden calves, which would become the new gods to be worshipped in the northern kingdom of Israel. And likewise, Britain is personified by John Bull, just like America is personified by Uncle Sam, which actually means Uncle Samuel, the name of the last judge in Israel. Joseph would push the people to the end of the earth, continuing with Moses' blessing to Joseph. And his horns are like the horns of unicorns. With them he shall push the people together to the ends of the earth. And they are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. Unquote from Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 17. In the historical accounts of the Old Testament, we read nothing about the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh pushing the people together to the ends of the earth. So either the blessing of Moses to Ephraim and Manasseh did not come true, or it did come true, but only under the new Christian covenant, not while Ephraim and Manasseh were under the Mosaic covenant. Because this blessing is very much fulfilled in especially Britain and America. The Industrial Revolution started in Britain in the mid-18th century and gave Britain a technological and economic edge over the rest of Europe and the world. After World War II, Britain passed on the baton of being the most important nation in the world to America. Since then, America has been the most important nation in the world, even though that position now, this is recorded in 2024, that America's position is being severely challenged by China and Russia and the BRICS group. The British Empire sent its fleets to just about every inhabited and uninhabited part of the world and coerced and battled the local peoples and set up colonies and pushed the natives out of the land they had formerly inhabited. Just try to think of the British colonization of India, Africa and the Middle East, and the Opium Wars against China, and the conquest of Australia and New Zealand, and the Falkland Islands War, etc., etc. So whether you think this was good or bad, it is a fulfillment of Moses' prophecy to Joseph, and in particular the 10,000s of Ephraim. The prophecy of Moses is also fulfilled in America since the end of World War II, where the US basically turned from being just a great nation to become an empire. Today, American military bases are all across the globe, much like Britain's colonies were spread all across the globe formerly. And just like the former British Empire, the American Empire has pushed the people together to the ends of the earth through numerous wars and proxy wars and covert operations, such as the Korean War and the Vietnam War, and the two invasions of Iraq, and the war against Serbia and Montenegro in 2008, and the bombardment of Libya in 2011, and the bombardments of Syria in 2013, and the continuing effort to depose the Syrian President Assad, and the present proxy war against Russia in the Ukraine, and the present conflict in the Middle East, where the US and Britain and allies are bombarding Yemen and Syria and Iraq, etc., etc., etc. So whether you agree or disagree with all these American interventions around the world, it is nonetheless a fact that they are the fulfillment of the words which the man Jacob pronounced over the two sons of Joseph approximately 3,200 years ago. Ephraim and Joseph are like bulls and our ox. The prophecy of Moses said that Joseph's horns are like the horns of unicorns. This is fulfilled in the heraldry of the royal house of Britain, where we find a lion and a unicorn. Now, unicorns, of course, they never existed. The Hebrew word ren, which is translated into unicorn in the King James Version, it actually means wild bull, according to Strong's Concordance, and it must refer to the our ox. The our ox is the wild ancestor of modern domesticated cattle. The our ox was very different from modern cattle. Contrary to domesticated modern cattle, the our ox was a ferocious beast which retreated from no one. The body of bulls had an average height of almost 2 meters, which is the height of a tall modern male man today. And when Julius Caesar met them in Gaul in France, he described them as being almost the size of elephants and just as ferocious. The description of the great and ferocious nature of the our ox, it fits much better with the nature of the former British Empire and the modern American Empire. They were both great and pushed other peoples to the end of the earth and bowed down to no man. This is important to understand. Joseph was not prophesied to be some kind of My Little Pony unicorn, but he was prophesied to be something like an our ox, which would have tremendous power. The prophet Jeremiah likens Ephraim to a bullock in Jeremiah chapter 31 verse 18. And the Hebrew word that Jeremiah uses is egel, according to Strong's Concordance. And this Hebrew word egel, that is similar to Angel, which is the name of one of the Germanic-speaking tribes from northern Germany, which invaded Great Britain in the 6th century, and from whom we have the name England. And the name of the homeland of the Angles is, well, in English it's Anglia, in German it's Angel, in Danish it's Angel, and in Old English it's Engel. All these names are rather similar to Egel or Egel, which was the Hebrew word that Jeremiah used about Ephraim. The camp of Ephraim to the west. When Israel was wandering in the desert of Sinai, the 12 tribes were divided into 4 camps with three tribes each. The camp on the west was the camp of Ephraim, which consisted of the tribes of Ephraim, Manasseh and Benjamin. We would therefore expect these 3 tribes to also settle west of the other Israelite tribes in their exile. And this is fulfilled in Britain, which is Ephraim, and the United States, which is Manasseh, and Iceland, which is Benjamin, which are to the west of the other Israelite nations that are on the European continent. Ephraim, small in territory. When Israel settled in the Holy Land, the northern 10 tribes were also referred to as the house of Ephraim, because Ephraim was the leading tribe. Despite that, the territory of the tribe of Ephraim was not particularly large. Manasseh got 2 territories, one west of the Jordan and one east of the Jordan in Bashan, which were much larger than Ephraim's territory, even though Ephraim was the leading tribe. And this is similar to Britain, especially England, which is rather small in size but densely populated. The United States, on the other hand, is much larger. Ephraim and the silent letter H. In the book of Judges, chapters 11 to 12, we read about the judge Jephthah from the land of Gilead, which would be the territory of Manasseh and Bashan. Jephthah defeated the Ammonites who were about to invade Israel, but the Ephraimites complained to Jephthah that he had not asked them to send men to the battle, and said that they would kill Jephthah and his house. In this story, we find several parallels to Britain Ephraim and America Manasseh. First, the Ephraimites said to Jephthah and to the Gileadites that they were fugitives from Ephraim. We quote, "Then Jephthah gathered together all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim, and the men of Gilead smote Ephraim because they said, 'Ye Gileadites are fugitives of Ephraim among the Ephraimites and among the Manassites.'" Unquote, from the book of Judges, chapter 12, verse 4. This is similar to the American Revolution, where the British in the 13 American colonies rebelled, and the English viewed them as quote-unquote fugitives and illegal separatists from England. And like Jephthah and the Gileadites defeated Ephraim, so did the 13 American colonies defeat England. After the defeat, the Ephraimites tried to get back to the territory of Ephraim, but were stopped at the Jordan River by the Gileadites. In order to ascertain who were Ephraimites and who were not, the Gileadites told the men to pronounce the word Shibboleth, but the Ephraimites could not pronounce the letter H in the word and pronounced it Sibboleth. Quote, "And the Gileadites took the passages of Jordan before the Ephraimites. And it was so that when those Ephraimites which were escaped said, 'Let me go over,' that the men of Gilead said unto him, 'Art thou an Ephraimite?' If he said, 'Nay,' then said they unto him, 'Say now Shibboleth,' and he said, 'Sibboleth,' for he could not frame to pronounce it right." Unquote from the book of Judges, chapter 12, verses 5 to 6. This silent age is also found in English spoken in England, for example, in the musical My Fair Lady. The English Eliza says, and we quote, and I'm sure I'm mispronouncing this completely, "In Artford, Erford and Ampshire hurricanes hardly ever happen," unquote. King Jeroboam and Cecil Rhodes. A man who was the cause of one of the greatest sins recorded in the Bible is King Jeroboam. After King Solomon died, the leaders of Israel went to Solomon's son, King Rehoboam, and asked him to reduce the tax burden. But Rehoboam refused, and therefore the 10 tribes led by Jeroboam seceded from the house of David. Jeroboam reasoned that if the 10 tribes continued to worship the God of Israel, they would go to the temple in Jerusalem and would eventually return to the house of David. Therefore Jeroboam decided to let go of the God of Israel and set up 2 golden calves, one in Bethel or Bethel in Ephraim and one in Dan, and made them the new gods of the 10 tribes. We read about that in 1 Kings chapter 12. Jeroboam was of the tribe of Ephraim. Now, many of the events recorded in the Bible are not just historical events, but also types or hidden prophecies, even though the Bible does not specifically say that they are. We shall therefore look for a personage from Ephraim, Britain, who started the political aspect of the Western nations' rebellion against Christ. Now, the causes of the great falling away from the Christian faith are manifold, including the occult societies and mystery religions, such as the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and the Illuminati, which trace their origins back to ancient Egypt and Babylon. But here we are focusing on the political aspect of the great falling away. Now, a major cause for the great falling away from the Christian faith and for turning the Western nations into multi-ethnic and multi-religious states is the so-called globalists. Globalism is anything but an organic grassroots movement, but has from its very inception been led and supported both politically and financially by a part of the Western elite. The Western globalist elites are organized into a number of organizations, most of which keep a low profile, but are not really secret societies. They do have websites and meet out in the. Now, all scholars who have studied the history of the Western globalist elites, both those who are against it and those who are sympathetic to it, they trace their origin back to one man, the English imperialist Cecil Rhodes. One scholar who wrote about the Western globalist elite was the Irish-American Carroll Quigley. Quigley studied history at Harvard University, and he taught at Princeton University, Harvard University, and Georgetown University, and worked as advisor to the U.S. Defense Department, the U.S. Navy, and the Smithsonian Institution. One of Quigley's students was Bill Clinton. When Clinton was nominated as the Democratic candidate for the 1992 election, Clinton mentioned 2 men as his great inspirations. First, John F. Kennedy and Carroll Quigley. In other words, Quigley was a highly respected mainstream historian. People within the Western globalist elite, whom Quigley called the network, they granted Quigley access to their archives so that he could write sympathetic books, which he did. The first was called Tragedy and Hope, published in 1966, and then in 1981 he published The Anglo-American Establishment. Even though Quigley was sympathetic to the so-called network, he wrote about a number of things he was not supposed to write about, and for this reason the network made the publisher stop printing the book, even though it was a bestseller. But in his books, Quigley writes about the existence of this semi-secret network which was formed to bring, quote, all habitable portions of the world, unquote, under its control. And that's a quote from Carroll Quigley's book, Tragedy and Hope, page 131. And then we have another quote from Carroll Quigley. I know of the operations of this network because I've studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims and have, for much of my life, been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected both in the past and recently to a few of its policies, but in general my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown, and I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known." Unquote. From Tragedy and Hope, page 950. But to get back to King Jeroboam of the tribe of Ephraim, who was the political culprit for making the 10 tribes stop following the God of Israel, then Carroll quickly traced the origins of the network back to the English imperialist Cecil Rhodes. Rhodes, he became filthy rich through borrowing money from the Rothschild family to buy up South African gold mines, including the De Beers Mining Company, and Rhodes used his money and influence to start a secret society with the aim of bringing the world under British dominion. Rhodes's political heir, and Rhodes, he was a homosexual and he had therefore no children, but Rhodes's political heir was Lord Alfred Milner, who started the Royal Institute of International Affairs in Britain and the Council of Foreign Relations in America. And since then, these two organizations have had a tremendous influence on British and American foreign policy, and it has always been with the aim of eroding borders and make the Anglo-American globalist elite more powerful. The same circle of influential Westerners have since then started the Bilderberg Club in 1954 and the Trilateral Commission in 1973 and the World Economic Forum in 1971. Their aim is, besides enriching and empowering themselves, to erode borders in order to bring about a one-world government, controlled by themselves, of course. They are the origin of what you today call globalism, and it all started with the Englishman Cecil Rhodes. Joseph's brothers throw him in a well compared to the Napoleonic Wars and World War I and World War II. After Joseph had brought an evil report about the 4 sons of the handmaidens and had told of his 2 dreams to his parents and to his brothers conspired to kill Joseph by throwing him into a well to die, but decided instead to sell him as a slave. Now, according to Rabbi Jacob Zvi Mecklenburg, who lived in Posen in Germany from 1785 to 1865, according to Rabbi Mecklenburg, it was the 6 sons of Leah and not the 4 sons of the handmaidens who decided to first kill and then to sell Joseph. I have that from Yair Davidi's YouTube lecture, The Needed Humility of Joseph, from 2024. But this throwing Joseph into the well, it has a parallel in the Napoleonic Wars and in World War I and World War II. Generally speaking, the modern nations of Joseph are the English-speaking nations, while the nations of the sons of Leah are the nations on the northwestern part of the European continent, and the nations of the sons of the handmaidens are the Nordic nations or the Scandinavian nations. And there are many parallels between the Napoleonic Wars and the 2 world wars. One of them is that, generally speaking, it was the nations of continental Europe, both France and Germany, which tried to invade and defeat England. Those 3 giant wars also ended with England and the English-speaking nations dominating continental Europe. And also during those 3 wars, Scandinavia was most of the time not involved in those wars. Now, the reason that France and Germany attacked England during these wars, it is not because France and Germany are Gentile, non-Israelite nations. No, on the other hand, it is because France and Germany are Israelite nations, because France and Germany are descended from the Israelite tribes descended from the sons of Leah. That's why they attacked England, Joseph, just like it was the sons of Leah who threw Joseph into the well. Ephraim, a cosmopolitan company of nations. Ephraim and Manasseh were born in Egypt as the sons of the prime minister of Egypt, who was Joseph, and an Egyptian mother, Asenath. In the eyes of the Egyptians and in the eyes of the rest of the world, Ephraim and Manasseh were Egyptians, even though they were actually Israelites. Likewise, when the 10 sons of Jacob came to Egypt to buy corn and they met Joseph, they actually thought that Joseph was an Egyptian. And we read about that in Genesis chapter 42. So the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, they were therefore going to be more cosmopolitan than the other Israelite tribes, and which on the other hand were to become more, we could call it tribal in character. Ephraim and Manasseh, they are therefore going to resemble the non-Israelite nations of the world more than the other Israelite tribes are. So this cosmopolitan characteristic, it is fulfilled in the English-speaking nations of the world. For example, when immigrants move into English-speaking nations, whether it's the UK or the United States or Canada, or Australia or New Zealand, they are generally not expected to give up their identity, but they are welcome to be a part of a multi-ethnic nation, all founded by white Brits. And whether you think this is a good or a bad idea, it is a reflection of how Joseph of old viewed the world when he was Prime Minister of Egypt. And then on the other hand, here in continental Europe and Scandinavia, where the bulk of the non-Josephite tribes of the Israelite tribes reside, immigrants are generally expected to integrate or assimilate into the nation where they settle. For instance, here in Denmark, Danes, they expect immigrants to more or less assume the identity and the language and the culture and the political values of the Danes. And there's a lot of Muslim immigrants who refuse to do that, and that's why there's a lot of opposition to Muslim immigration into Denmark. But then on the other hand, in the UK and in the United States, Muslim immigrants, they are generally welcome to live together in, well, we could call it Muslim ghettos, where they could retain their Muslim and their ethnic identity. And that's different from here in Denmark, where the government goes to great lengths to integrate and assimilate immigrants and to make sure that that's the reason is to make sure that there arises no ethnic or Muslim, quote-unquote, ghettos. And that's just one more example of how the descendants of Joseph are more cosmopolitan and multi-ethnic in their consciousness, whereas the descendants of the other Israelite tribes, they are more tribal in their consciousness. Joseph Ephraim, a tribe separated from his brothers. In Genesis, Joseph was separated from his brothers because they sold him as a slave, and then he ended up in Egypt. And in the blessings of Moses to the tribes of Israel, Moses specifically blesses Joseph as him who was separated from his brethren. We quote from the book of Deuteronomy. Let the blessing come upon the head of Joseph, and upon the top of the head of him that was separated from his brethren. Unquote from Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 16. This is fulfilled in Britain, which likewise is separated from the other tribes of Israel on the European continent, and from the Jews in the state of Israel and other Israelites in the North America and elsewhere. So Britain is separated from the other Western nations in Europe geographically by the fact that the British live on the British Isles, and Canada, Australia and New Zealand, they are even more separated geographically from the other Israelite nations because they are on different continents. Well, Canada neighbors the US, but still. So although the British Isles are part of Europe in a strict geographical sense, the British often do not consider themselves Europeans. The French general and later President Charles de Gaulle, he said on the eve on D-Day in 1944 that if the British were ever to choose between Europe and the open seas, they would always choose the latter. A British business website which specializes in understanding different cultures in order to optimize the success of international businessmen, they write, quote, The British have always survived on myths. The most pernicious of them find expression internationally in a sense of feeling different from their European neighbors, which is partly justified, and domestically in awareness of class distinction. Other key features include a love of tradition, a distaste for regulation, and the cult of the amateur. Jane Kramer, perhaps the most perceptive transatlantic observer of the old world, says this in her book Europeans. They quote from her. The English produced the most class-ridden society in Europe and in some ways the most aggressively self-deluded, and for many centuries managed to hold it together by pretending that responsible social cooperation was a national expression of Englishness rather than the protective accommodation of citizens to one country, to one another in a free country. Unquote. The British business website writes that this mentality originates from the Norman conquest in 1066, where the Normans became the landowning class and the Anglo-Saxons, they became the plebs. But this mentality is in fact much older. It goes all the way back to Joseph of old, who was separated from his brethren. In Canada, Australia and New Zealand, the geographical separation is even more pronounced because they are situated in different continents. But the class distinction mentality, however, that is not as pronounced as in Britain. So this concludes our study about the lost Israelite tribe of Ephraim, which is Britain and its daughter nations. We could say much more about the similarities between Ephraim and Britain, but this should be enough for now.